Yeah, we're hanging around, so come grab us.
All right. Well, one last reminder that if you want recordings of the session, go to superconference.com/bitcoinsuperconference.com/recordings. Also, our last speaker is Stan Larimer, president of Cryptonomics Incorporated, and his topic is going to be the jump to light speed. Stan is a prolific blogger, a keynote speaker, and an expert consultant on real-time industrial-grade digital currencies. He is CEO of Cryptonomics, co-founded with his son, Dan Larimer, the originator of blockchain technologies that currently process over half of all public blockchain transactions in the world. These include BitShares, Steemit, PeerPlays, Muse, Goyos, and next year, EOS. So would you please welcome Stan?
Well, hello, everybody, and glad to be here for the last speech, perhaps of my life, because the kind of things I'm going to talk about here might get your attention. I would suggest if you're going to do it, this slide will be up at the end of the presentation, but I'd take a picture of it now because I may need to be escorted from the stage for my own safety, and we might not get that far in the presentation. What you can expect to have happen is about 10 minutes into the presentation, a crowd will start forming down here in front of me. They'll have pitchforks and torches and tomatoes, and about 20 minutes is probably all the further I'll get. But wanted to set your expectations for the grand finale of what we have here. Okay, so I noticed the title of this conference is the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. So I need to take a little survey. You folks have all been out here, steeped in this stuff for 3 days, and you've learned all kinds of things and formed all kinds of new opinions. So I'd just like to take a quick survey. How many of you in here feel that Bitcoin is the #1 blockchain in the world? Okay. How many of you think that Ethereum is the #1 blockchain in the world? Aha! Very tribal, aren't we? How many think it's some other blockchain is the #1 in the world? Woo! Okay. Well, all of you guys could be right because we haven't really agreed on what we're measuring when we're saying what's #1, right? So what I will do here is, I don't want to give away the end of it, so I'll just jump right past that and point out to you the fact that what's #1 depends on which axis you're measuring it on. Okay? Now, I don't think anybody here will objectively argue that Bitcoin is not #1 on the axis of market cap, right? Okay, we'll concede that particular battle. I think along another axis of, let's say, flexibility and maybe rabid programmer community, we might find Ethereum #1. And I'm sure that's what some of you were thinking when you objectively ranked Ethereum as the #1 blockchain in the world. And then there's the question of BitShares. How does it deserve to be up there? Its market cap is down barely in the top 40. Well, suppose we look at 3 different axes. I've already talked about market cap, and I've already talked about utility, but what about performance? If you're going to ask who's the best athlete in the whole world, it's going to kind of matter which sport we're playing, right? Bitcoin is a big sumo wrestler, but sumo wrestlers aren't very good at tennis, and gymnasts are not very good at sumo wrestling, right? And yet each of those can claim to be #1 in their field, and that's what we're going to talk about today, that all-important performance axis where BitShares and the other technologies of Dan Larimer come into play. Dan Larimer started out with BitShares, which is an unmanned exchange and a smart coin factory all integrated on one blockchain. And then he did Steemit, which is a social media network that is also integrated on a blockchain with its own currency. And now he's off working on EOS, which is not describable in the amount of time I have. So, but at any rate, we've had other spin-offs of other people doing things with that technology, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today, the significance of that family of technologies as we go here. Performance is going to matter. If anybody is familiar with the CryptoKitties incident, it doesn't take much for a new innovative application to come on a blockchain and basically eat up all of its bandwidth. And right now, in the past year, I've lost count. What are there, 200 or so different companies all bringing their products onto one of the blockchains? They're either building it on Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. And if we're already pretty well crowded in terms of saturated, in terms of processing time, what happens when 200 companies come flooding in here this year and try to use those existing systems? I go to boardrooms all the time and talk to different CEOs and their teams, and I say, you've started out doing this and you're doing it on Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. How many customers do you think you have? Oh, we got millions of customers. Really? How many transactions per second do you think you'll be doing with your new system? Oh, man, thousands. We'll be at Visa levels of transactions. And I said, you realize that the existing bandwidth of Bitcoin and Ethereum summed together is less than 30 transactions per second for the entire world? How are you going to put that many transactions on there knowing that you have 200 other companies out there planning to do the exact same thing this year? At that point, what usually happens is the CEO turns to his CTO and says, is that true? The CTO says, well, but nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. That's what you used to say back in the 1970s. Nobody ever got fired for doing something on Bitcoin or Ethereum. They're the leaders, they're famous. So that's what I recommended to you, boss. But we're going to have thousands of transactions per second from our customers. What's going to happen? Well, boss, we're just going to have to get in line. I usually exit the boardroom about then and try to get out of earshot before what happens after that. But the fact of the matter is we're faced with that kind of a problem, that kind of a traffic jam that everybody's got to do. And then I tell them about the fact that BitShares could do the job. It's got a smart coin factory. They can make their own smart coin in less than an hour and have it trading globally and have it basically transactions taking an average of 1.5 seconds and bandwidth enough to handle multiple credit cards like Visa at 4,000 transactions per second. Multiple of those. All that sitting there. And what usually happens is within a week they come back and say, we're switching onto something that can handle our workload because quite frankly, we don't care which one is the biggest and we don't care which one is the most flexible in terms of smart contracts. We care about simply getting our token to be transmitted wherever it needs to go so that we get good customer performance. And so that's what I spend my time doing, going around making trouble like that for everybody. Let's see if we can get... See, this is the kind of thing I told you that would happen. We're not seeming to advance. And I am pressing the white button as hard as I can. Oh, that's an idea. All right. Oh, okay.
There's a little switch on the side that turns it off.
Oh, well, somehow in the process, someone snuck up here and turned off the power switch on my handset. Okay, this is the most significant slide available. It's taken off of blocktivity.info, which is kind of like your coin-to-market cap, where if along the market cap axis, this is along the activity axis. The number of transactions that happened on these blockchains during the past 7 days. I just made this chart a couple days ago, so this is for the past week, how things ranked on transactions versus market cap. Of course, you wouldn't be surprised on the right to see the market cap pie chart with Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then Steam and BitShares sitting down in that little sliver. But if you look over at the activity, the total amount of transactions that take place on all the world's blockchains summed up, the top 4 most active blockchains are Steam, that's Dan's second project, BitShares, Dan's first project, Ethereum comes in third, and Bitcoin's that little sliver there. The rest of the industry is shown in the final little sliver. And to be fair, BitShares and Ethereum toggle back and forth right now. On any given day, you look there, you may see them in a different order. Bitcoin's usually in 4th place. Steam, it's always safely in 1st place in terms of the number of transactions. So I would describe this chart as a comparison of a lagging indicator. Market cap is sort of the integral of where you've been, how successful you've been in the past. That's how you got to be so big. And the leading indicator is how much are you being used. And in that, it turns our whole worldview upside down. Because if you look at that and add Steam and BTS, which do not use mining, that's something Dan announced he was getting rid of several years ago. The reason why they have so much excess power is because they don't use mining. 2/3 of the total transactions for this blockchain industry are done by non-mining systems. Where's the crowd? There's supposed to be a crowd with pitchforks here right now. I know that that is a scary thought. I feel like Henry Ford at a buggy whip convention. Okay, but the fact of the matter is, we already have an industry where mining is a boutique business. Okay, and the other thing we saw is that the other 2 leaders, Bitcoin and Ethereum, are approaching maximum, right? What happens when we have a big ICO and they get crowded? Things clog up, there's a backlog, they hit peak, but they are already banging the stops. So we know the industry is going to grow, and they can't absorb any more business. They can only do what they can do and ration it by increasing the charge for transactions. Whereas the other ones that don't use mining are very off zero in terms of the amount they're using. They have room to grow. So what does that imply if we look forward towards the end of this year? Okay? And this is before Dan's latest project of EOS. This is just with the current systems that he's got. This is my extrapolation. As the industry grows and you can't put any more on Bitcoin and Ethereum, these are going to be the ones that are going to be soaking up the slack. So next year at this time when I'm standing here, the chart could look like this in terms of the amount of the industry's transactions that are happening using non-mining technology. And that little sliver there is for all the rest that insist on using mining. Now, it's not going to look like that because the latest project of EOS is going to come thundering across the stage come this summer. And it's going to squeeze BitShares and Steam down a little, but it's going to make that other little sliver all the smaller because there's plenty of room for it to soak up activity. If you look over on this, once again at blocktivity.info, the little sweatometers. Okay, this was the sweatometer status as of Friday when I took this snapshot. You notice that Steam and BitShares sweatometers are just, they're not using hardly any of their capacity, and yet they're keeping up with the other 2. And Ethereum and Bitcoin, somewhere around the middle, but any given day you may find those pegged clear over with a little exclamation, or a little diamond or a triangle with an exclamation point in it, indicating they're backlogged, meaning 100% utilization and then backlogged on top of that. Okay? So, These are the metrics I think that matter when I'm talking to executives. They don't want to hear about flexibility. They don't want to hear about market cap. They want to hear what can it do for them. And so I put these together, comparing the dollar, and I've just picked Bitcoin because it's usually number one, and BitShares. Going to look at several things that are often discussed in terms of how people evaluate things. Let's just get rid of the whole business of centralization. Some people want to say things are more or less centralized as if that's the critical factor. Well, let's look at the US dollar. The Federal Reserve has 7 Federal Reserve leaders that make the decision. They get together, and it only takes 4 of them in order to have a majority out of the 7 on the Board of Governors. And so the control factor, you might say, for the US dollar is 4. And of course, we all know that with Bitcoin, this is the pie chart of how many transactions get signed by the leading companies that do this. And as you can see, 4 slices get you over 51%. We all know this. Okay? So Bitcoin is as decentralized as the Federal Reserve in terms of how many people you need to have in order to have the authority to change something in the software. One of the key features of BitShares is the fact that people vote for them, and it forces them all to be uniform in terms of number of blocks to sign. And the limitation is a function of how many people are trusted to sign nodes. You can't fire somebody who has hashing power no matter how they behave. Any one of those BitShares slices can be fired by losing confidence of the community voting for them. And so BitShares has a decentralization factor of over double what Bitcoin and the Federal Reserve have. I just say that not because I want to make a big deal about it, but because some other people do. When you talk about speed, there we go. Oops. The dollar, if you're going to wire something to the other side of the planet, maybe 3 days, cost you $30. I had to sort of switch modes here to get something comparable. So the Visa system, maybe 4,000 transactions per second, theoretically up to 60,000 if they needed it. If you look at Bitcoin, what do we use for a number there? It could happen inside of an hour or two if you pay enough, and it could take several days if you don't. So I use 3 hours and $3, but those could fluctuate all over the place. Total capacity well under 30 transactions per second. BitShares takes 3 seconds to complete every transaction, and probably for about a penny. Demonstrated performance of 3,300 transactions per second, and we argue about how much above that it can get. In the laboratory, we showed 180,000 transactions per second for the key thread, but of course that's just theoretical. But that gives you an idea of some of the factors that if I was doing a business and deciding what platform to locate on, I would build it on something that could pass those kind of metrics. Does that make sense? Okay, let's look at this little chart here, just so we can put these different coins on these 3 axes, because now we've got 3, and I don't deny the fact that there's probably a dozen other ways we could evaluate them, but these 3, I'm going to plot our favorite coins on here in a minute. I just want to point out that the price axis is linear, the utility axis is kind of a judgment call, but we'll make it linear. But the performance is on a log scale. Every one of those little major divisions is a factor of 10. And so when you're talking about the room I need in order to show the difference, it's the difference between the speed of a horse and the speed of a starship. The 3 things that go into those performance metrics are the difference in how much time it takes you to complete one transaction, that's latency. The difference in terms of how many transactions per second you can do, and that's bandwidth. And the third is the amount of power consumed per transaction. In the case of Bitcoin, one transaction consumes the power necessary to power a house for a week, and BitShares takes the amount of power to power a cell phone for a second. So when I multiply those 3 together, that's how I get that kind of a generic number of quantum differences. It's the difference between a horse or a Model T and something that can go faster than the speed of light. That's what 8 orders of magnitude means. So if we look on that chart, you plot Bitcoin on there, and it comes out the utility axis because you can send value around the planet. Not very far off the performance axis. It's gotten a little better, so it's above the 0 performance, and then clear up to the ceiling in terms of maximum market cap. So that's where I plotted on the 3D scale. Ethereum, on the other hand, it's faster than Bitcoin, maximally flexible. It's Turing complete, although BitShares is Turing complete too. It uses C++, and that's a Turing complete language. So it's more than being Turing complete. It's being able to have anybody modify the code without saying "Mother may I" to the owners of the network. And then it's got a nice market cap too, not as high as Bitcoin, but that's where it sits on the scale. There's where BitShares sits. Okay, comes out the utility axis. You can make any coin you want. It's a smart coin factory, all kinds of smart coins, and a built-in exchange, unmanned, decentralized exchange. That's pretty good utility. Not total flexibility like Ethereum, but it's out there. But it's clear across past the Visa zone, which is the 4,000 transactions per second, and over into the DPoS, basically the delegated proof of stake technology that runs underneath all of what Dan has developed. And over here is the proof of work zone. Mining is forever going to be in this side, and anything that wants to run fast needs to find another solution than mining. I'm telling you guys all this because you're probably some of your investors, and you hear a lot about what mining is going to do. It's not needed for this industry, okay? Mining is something that people do because it's fun and profitable right now. But it's not something that's going to stick around when the industry takes over everything. Where's the crowd with the pitchforks? Okay. And then there's EOS over there, which, when it gets done, it's going to stretch that box along 3 different axes. And I put in peer plays and Steemit as other things that are over in the DPoS zone just for completeness. Okay, now the other thing about this is that we're really, at this point, beyond talking about which platform is better, because the real place where cool, interesting things is going to happen in the coming year is in what you put on it. All the cool new tokens that are going to be out there that people are going to want to be trading for different purposes. And I'm going to show you some of them that are new ones coming out in the next few months that you can be watching for, all of which are on the BitShares network, because when you do a token on the BitShares network, guess what? You jump to light speed too, because you can transfer any one of these tokens just as fast and just as many of them as you can with BitShares base BTS token. So I'm just going to give you a few samples here just to give you the idea, and then you can ask yourself, people who want to build a plain, ordinary, asset-backed token, and they want it to trade out there against everything else and have a lot of volume, what do you think people are going to pick for the place to host that token? Right now, if it's an ICO, you want to do it on Ethereum because there's lots of money there that can flow into your new token. But as we move into the regulatory regime of 2018, it'll all be about high security tokens, ones that are approved by the various governments of this world. And that's where the flight to safety is going to happen out of things last year that were sort of Wild West kind of coins, money flowing to safety into things that are approved solid investments. And where do you think those kind of investments should trade? Or any other coin that serves as a utility token for some company that wants to interact at game speeds. BitShares can interact at the rate at which a card is dealt in a game, or a live action video game, or the tumbling of slot machines. It can keep up with that. That's why we call it a real-time industrial grade blockchain. But what's happening now with these tokens that I just showed you is that we move from industrial grade, where we've been for a couple years, to institutional grade. We've heard a little bit about that this afternoon. Institutions expect regulatory compliance and nice solid performance, and they'd like to be able to do business at the speed of light. So that's where we would expect these coins to happen. And we're jumping around here, sorry about that. One of them is a company called Quintric, which is offering a really novel gold-backed coin. It's a company that is a joint venture between my company, Cryptonomics, and the United Precious Metals Association in Utah, which is a big gold depository there that managed to get gold made legal tender again in Utah. And so now they're going to get electronic gold made legal tender in Utah. Think of that in terms of a powerful thing, because you can spend that without incurring capital gains because it's been called a legal tender. Now that last step hasn't happened yet, but that's what they're working towards. And in the meantime, you've got a nice stable coin that is backed by real gold, and you can take delivery of it. It's not backed by gold on the dark side of the moon or in a bunker somewhere in the Philippines. No, it is something that you can take delivery of. And so we think that'll be a particularly interesting coin. There's a variety of, a variety of other coins that are part of the international quint that are backed by all the famous other government-sponsored coins of one form or another. And over on the right, that picture of Alexander the Great represents a coin about to be released by the Silk Route Museum, which...
How I wish we had more time, because this is
ran out.
absolutely fascinating, but we are down to 3, 2, 1. And if we had the ability to stay in this room, we could do Q&A. But unfortunately, the hotel needs this space immediately. So
okay, that's all I need to say.
What we would invite you to do is, if you and Stan would like to go out in the hall and to follow up with questions, please feel free to do so. But we are unable to stay in this room because of the time constraint. So my apologies. Thank you for coming. If you want to get recordings of Stan's presentations and the others, please.
Okay.
Remember to go to bitcoinsuperconference.com/recordings. If you're interested in the next, which I have learned that the date has not yet been set for the next conference, that will be available at bitcoinsuperconference/early. So thank you again for coming. We appreciate your participation, and we hope you've enjoyed the content.